The first time I saw the number on that bill, I thought they'd made a mistake, then I thought I was being stupid. 2 months later, the same number stared back at me, like a dare. I'm Ethan Cole. I live on 12 quiet acres by Willow Ridge Lake, and I don't pay attention to drama until drama plugs itself into my life literally. I work on the road a lot, hauling modular wall sections for small contractors, and when I'm home I tinker in the shed, fix fences, drink bad coffee on the porch. I installed an EV charger out in the driveway because it made sense. Efficient, quiet, no more gas station pit stops. I kept receipts. I watched the readings. When the bill jumped threefold, I did what any reasonable, mildly obsessive person does. I wrote it down. I checked the breaker. I cursed a little. Then I set up a camera. There's something funny about watching your life through a lens. The little ordinary moments get edged into a narrative, and then you start to notice patterns you didn't want to see. At midnight, the motion sensor would blink. At 1 a.m, a pair of headlights would slide across the gravel. At 2 a.m, the charger would glow warm. I watched footage until the grainy figure became a face I knew too well. Marjorie Hale. She's on the HOA board, the kind of woman who carries a clipboard like a scepter, who knows the rules by heart and remembers them for other people, the neighborhood's appointed moral compass, or so she likes to think. I could have confronted her with a polite email or asked the board to mediate, but those don't suit small betrayals. They require a different kind of honesty. So I printed the stills, I made a sequence, and I went to her door. Standing on her porch under the lamplight, with images in my hand, I felt ridiculous for being nervous. That passed when she opened the door and smiled like she owned the place. "Ethan, what brings you here at this hour?" she said, with the kind of warmth that lets you know you're on her stage. "I have footage," I said, "of you using my charger." Repeatedly. Her smile narrowed, just enough to show the edges of it. "You've got a camera in your yard now? How civilized." "I don't want to make this messy, Marjorie. You can just what? Put it on the HOA list? Throw me under the bus to the neighbors." She stepped forward, voice low and sharp. "Do you know what I could do with your little security toy? I could call the sheriff on you for harassment." That was the tone, performatively reasonable, but threaded with threat. She had two kinds of power, the official kind, signatures and meeting minutes, and the quieter kind, the one people use to shape gossip and gatekeeping. I left with a promise tucked under my tongue and an anger that didn't feel like mine at first, more like a pressure on a door I could finally push. I tried the neighbors. Some rolled their eyes, some nodded and looked away. When the board served me with a notice, "Unauthorized equipment on common grounds," I laughed until I realized I wasn't laughing. They claimed my charger was on HOA easement, an assertion that was nonsense if you looked at the survey. But the board's letters come with weight. They feel official. They make people second-guess themselves. This is where it shifts, where the story stops being about a bill and becomes about who gets to tell the story in a small place. I went to the hardware store. I bought a tamper-proof lock for the charger, and I bought a small device, a cheap smart relay tied to a surge cutoff to protect my property. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a thermos and the camera feed and wait. Justice, in my head, can look a lot like patience. A week later, I caught her again. This time she stayed long enough for the device to trip and cut power. Her face contorted not with shock, but with rage that had been sharpened by entitlement. She shoved at the car, shouted at the air like a commander flinging orders. A neighbor's porch light clicked on, a silhouette watching from 2 houses down. I walked out, camera in hand, and she spotted me. "You've gone too far, Ethan," she called, cheeks red, voice high. "You'll pay for this." "Pay how?" I said, and I didn't mean money. "By what? Running my life through a committee? By filing papers? Because I'll show the footage. Publicly." "Oh, you'll show everyone what a nosy man you are," she spat. "You think they'll thank you?" That line, "you think they'll thank you," is what made me understand that Marjorie's fight wasn't about a charger. It was about control. She liked deciding which complaints were worthy, which people belonged, which stories were acceptable to be told in the community room with coffee and stale donuts. She liked being the one with the megaphone. So I did the unromantic thing. I organized. I printed flyers. I sent clear emails. I knocked on doors, and I didn't flirt or flatter. I just told the truth plainly: footage, dates, times. I asked others quietly if they'd ever had problems with the HOA's heavy hand. The replies came slow at first, then like the opening of a dam. A story about a landscaper fined for a missing permit, a woman pushed into silence over a paint color, Two people who'd had trailers towed overnight without notice. The pattern was not a mistake, it was a history. The town hall meeting was the kind of room you see in small dramas: fluorescent lights, folding chairs, an awkward podium. Marjorie arrived with allies, a stack of paper, a practiced smirk. She opened strong. "This is about community standards," she said, and the phrase landed like a hymn. I went up, put the footage on the screen 3 nights, the same car, the same person. I narrated gently, like I was telling a neighbor why their porch light was blinking. She attacked me with prose. She questioned my motives, suggested I was creating drama for clicks, a weird accusation in a room full of retired teachers and contractors. She pointed at my camera as proof I wasn't a team player. Then a woman I'd met at the door, Janet, who ran a catering business and had kept her mouth shut for 2 years about an unpaid assessment, stood up and told a short, fierce story about being bullied by the board. Another man, a quiet type who mows 3 lawns on the weekends, said he'd been fined for a mailbox. The room shifted. People who had been polite suddenly remembered their voices. Marjorie fought back with procedural cleverness, but it felt thin now. You can paper over a problem with bylaws, but you can't paper over the look on 100 faces when they hear the same old hurt told plainly. The vote to form an independent review committee passed by a narrow margin, not a revolution, but a start. They asked Marjorie to step down from her treasurer role temporarily while the committee looked into the charges. She left the room with her chin high, but there was a crack you could see if you watched closely. And then there were the small things: retaliation disguised as rules. A letter about a shed's paint color, a citation about a fence height, gossip that made coffee awkward. Someone keyed my pickup, shallow marks that cost $100 to buff out, and a week of feeling watched. The cost of standing up is not always legal fees or bills. Sometimes it's the tiny invasions that make you wonder if you were brave or just stubborn. The climax, the scene you'd see in a short film, came a few weeks later. The committee presented findings: consistent misuse of HOA authority, selective enforcement, and a pattern of intimidation. It wasn't a slam-dunk criminal case, but it was enough for the community to act. Marjorie was removed from the board. She packed her files like a general leaving a defeated outpost and drove away with her hands tied on the wheel. People who had been fearful stood in the street and said things like, "About time," and "We should have listened sooner," and they meant it, messy and human. There's a part here that's important. Victory doesn't taste like triumph so much as relief, and relief is complicated. The charger light still glows green in the mornings, and some nights I catch myself watching the road out of habit. The neighbors who stepped forward got a few apologies and a lot of coffee invites. The ones who had stayed silent lingered at the edges, unsure. We formed a committee that included a younger neighbor who understands online transparency, an older couple who'd lived here 30 years, and a person from outside the neighborhood to keep things honest. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Lessons come slow. I learned that ownership isn't just property lines and deeds, it's also standing for how people should be treated. Marjorie taught me about the danger of power concentrated in unchallenged hands. She was a product of a small system that rewarded performative guardianship. I learned that a person with a clipboard can be a real problem, and also that that same person is human, flawed, fearful, sometimes petty. I still charge my car at night. The green light, for me now, is a little emblem of boundaries, of saying no when something feels wrong. Does that make me a vigilante? Maybe. Does it make me someone who calls out a neighbor for stealing my power? Absolutely. The thing that sticks with me is this: small communities are messy. They're made of choices. Sometimes people choose protectionism. Sometimes they choose fairness. So here's where I want to hear from you. What would you have done? Was I right to install the camera and go to her door, or should I have handled it through the HOA channels from the start? Do you think communities like ours need stricter oversight, or do these problems just fizzle out if people mind their own business? Drop a comment, tell me which side you're on. Tell me if I crossed a line. Tell me a story about a time you stood up and it went sideways. If anything, let's talk about how we hold each other accountable without becoming the thing we hate.